Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School!
Oh, this week we're going to do that one scene from the Blair Witch Project.
Let's dive on in. Alright everybody, I am Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Pulcher.
And if you like what you see /hear, please like and subscribe. You can find us in all the spaces and places that people find good media.
I've heard.
That is what they've been saying.
Please subscribe. We got all sorts of festivals. We do that one scene every other week along with our festivals. We do recastings. We need to do a new recasting.
I know, definitely.
We have a variety of things, forgotten gems, all sorts of stuff to follow along with. So, go to wherever podcasts you listen to, go to YouTube, hit the notification bell, do all the things to follow us so you can get notified every time we have a new show. All right.
So
that one scene from Blair Witch Project. 1999. Can you believe it's been that over 20 years?
It's funny.
Witch?
I was talking with a couple coworkers about this movie the other day, and I think this movie came about at a really particular time where the internet was around, but it was not a reliable source of information. Not that it necessarily is now, but it was definitely less so back then in 99. And it meant that we were in a very particular time and place for a phenomenon like this movie to happen, where the guerrilla marketing style of those missing posters, the fact of this, is it real, is it not real?
They basically created the found footage genre
really,
that really went on to be mimicked by dozens, if not hundreds, of other movies, mostly horror, but beyond that as well,
and almost always to lessening degrees from the brilliance that is this movie.
Yeah, which is usually the case, right?
It usually is.
You think of something like Lord of the Rings and Two Towers, that first battle scene.
Yeah,
you're like, holy fuck, I've never seen anything like that before. And then every movie after that rips it off because you could do that with CGI and all this stuff. And then every war movie is the biggest thing you've ever seen from them. Like things like that, like important movies. And this was an important movie to me. This was like right after I graduated high school. I was super into indie film. I've told this story before, but me and my buddy Steve Wolf went to go see this movie and thought it was real.
Yeah.
They played that marketing. They did an amazing job marketing it. To the point where this scene that we're going to review, Heather's Apology, is like the poster. Right?
Yep, exactly. It became iconic.
Yeah, it became this big iconic thing. And my parents, we told them about it, and we were all freaked out and slept in the same room. We woke up, and there was little piles of sticks and rocks and stuff in front of our doors.
Was that your dad?
I think it was my mom. They were just fucking with us, but super funny and but there's that split second where you're like, oh shit,
it's all real.
It's real. This was a Sundance hit, and everyone, people, it's the classic, Reservoir Dogs showed at Sundance, and people were puking in the aisles. There's all that stuff of, people were like, oh, the found footage is all shaky, I get sick, and then you throw in they're being chased and everything through this. But this particular scene, just to give a little context to the scene, this is basically the last 10-15 minutes of the movie. We're about an hour into the movie. It's not a long movie.
They've been lost this entire time. They've been lost
in the wild, taunted for days now. Both Mike and Heather, and then we have Josh, I think, is the third character in this movie. And Josh is gone.
Yeah.
Mike and Heather are just at their wits' end. They're hungry, they're scared, they're tired. They just found a satchel bundle of sticks with with a flannel shirt wrapped up, and there's bloody teeth inside.
And it's definitely Josh's shirt. And they're hearing him at night calling out. They think, but then it's also very unintelligible, kind of garbled, and it's incredibly effective. I think that it's worth mentioning at this point the way in which the two directors came up with the the way to film this, which really was, and this is different than I think most
this is important
most
sure.
found footage films, which is the actors themselves really were the ones holding the cameras, right? I mean, if you think about
with not very much direction,
right? I mean, they were given they had GPS devices and were given very rudimentary notes of like, here's where you can find, granola bars and bottles of water for the next day.
Gotcha.
And then they each had their own package. And when they'd open it, there would just be a piece of paper with a handful of notes in it of what the motivation for this next day worth of filming is supposed to be, right? Mm-hmm. And then they're out there, the two directors whose names I forget, I'll post them here, but
Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sánchez.
And Eduardo Sánchez has gone on to do a couple of other things that I really like. Mm-hmm. I love Lovely Molly, if anybody knows that film. It came out, I mean, again, decades later. But you think about just this shoestring budget of a way to do this. They're in the woods fucking with them nonstop, right?
Which
to really
I love.
Heighten this emotional level. Like, they're acting, but also they are sleep deprived and they don't have a ton of food. And to be fair, later Heather Donahue, is that right?
Yeah, Donahue.
Said in interviews, like, I won't lie, like, when I told my parents I was going to do this, I was like, fingers crossed it's not a snuff film, because I don't know. Like, these guys are first-time filmmakers. Yeah. We're doing it in this really weird guerrilla style, and we are the filmmakers. And I think what makes this movie work is, one, there is no actual monster. I mean, there is a lot of sound of this witch or whatever it might be.
There's the suspicion of something else lingering. They're obviously there filming a documentary about the Blair Witch.
Right.
They're in the woods where it became famous and can't find their car. Yeah,
there's all these stories. Well, and there's this amazing thing that Josh says very early on in the movie that I think always stuck with me, where he's like, it's the 90s. You can't get lost in America, right? Which you just go, yeah, that naivety.
That's even more so now, right?
Right. Yeah. That naivety, though, is part of where the terror stems from.
Totally.
But the other thing that I think sets this apart is that they leaned so far into this is one of the first films I can think of that leaned really far into how gross camcorder footage actually looks. The colors are sour. Mm-hmm. They're pixelated. There's just fuzziness around the edges. Like, it looks bad, right? And even the 16 millimeter black and white that they've got, also you go, oh, that's what a film student would have at a film school, right?
That's what I had, yep.
Yeah, that big heavy ass thing. It's also grainy and it looks like old war movie footage, right? Like, it's scary looking in that way. And so they really lean into those aesthetics. And this is what I couldn't help thinking about when I watched it this time. For a movie that is all being physically shot by novices, how many iconic scenes can you still remember from this movie? There's like 10 or 15 that you're like, God, I can picture that shot in my head. And you're like, and there's not cinematographers. It's a bunch of novice actors that are carrying all this stuff around. And this shot, the apology shot, was an accident. Like, the original shot, she was told, film your whole face in the shot. And
it's really like, half her face.
She hit the zoom button on the camcorder.
Oh, she did.
She bumped it.
That's funny.
And when they saw it later, they were like, oh my God, it's fucking perfect.
It really is. She's got the snot. She's crying. She's obviously distraught. And, I do think how they film this movie is a pretty huge factor into the culmination of how they're feeling.
Yes.
And especially in this scene, Myrick described the scene as the moment in the film where it stopped being being a project about the Blair Witch and started being a chronicling of their last days on Earth.
Oh my God. And that is, it has this Greek tragedy feel to it almost, where it's like you think about, whether it's a Greek tragedy or a Shakespearean tragedy, like, you start from the premise of no one is going to live, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the very first title card in this movie, is that, like, these three students disappeared. And then even creepier too, that if you remember in the opening title card, it talks about that so many months later, workers were removing old rocks from a foundation, like in the woods, like a rock foundation, and that inside the foundation was this tape. So it's like, how did it get there, right? Like, only through supernatural means. And didn't all of us that had drama classes in high school know Heather? Know that precocious, I'm going to be a movie maker, right? And she is that through so much of the film, and this is her arc.
Yeah,
this apology.
Yeah, it totally is. I mean, this is really, it's a very simple shot. It's like a 2-minute scene, and it proves that that you can still be effective in something very tight and kind of bunched in there. And it's basically a confessional.
Yep.
Right? Her eyes are watering, she's crying,
hyperventilating at some
she's
points.
breathing really heavily, and you can, she's got this beanie on, and she's just basically just like, this is all my fault.
Yeah.
And speaking of naivety, right? You said that earlier, and that's totally what Heather is doing here is owning up to that. She's apologizing to the families of Josh and Mike and
it's so
all this stuff. This was her fault.
I'm the one that wanted really to keep going. I'm the one that wanted to do the project.
She's super flippant about this getting lost at the beginning and just thinking it was funny or whatever, and we'll be fine. It'll never happen to me, kind of thing. And they've been hunted through this movie.
Yeah.
And it turned into something way more than you thought it was, but
that's what I love.
Genius idea for a movie.
It really is, and that's what I love so much that doesn't get talked about enough, I think, is that hubris, that like prideful naivety that characters have in horror movies, and then they get bit in the ass. Yeah, it's like not comeuppance necessarily,
sure, yeah.
but it's and so rarely. Most of the time in a horror movie, when that group of naive characters finally comes up against the supernatural monster, we don't stay with those characters long enough to hear them talk about their regrets for not taking things more seriously or thinking about things differently.
Sure.
They go, oh my God, Jason Voorhees is real. And then they get their head cut off, right? And we're like, well, no, I want to stay with them for a while to hear those regrets. And so this moment of hearing this character, and you're like, my God, sweetheart, it's not your fault. Like, how could you possibly have known that the Blair Witch was real, right? Like
she tempted fate a little
she
bit.
She did within the confines of movie logic.
Yes.
But because so much of this feels so real, it's like if those horror movies were real. It's the closest you could get to that, which is you never see the monster, and you get the chance to apologize to the parents of your friends who you got killed.
Yeah. I mean, you think of the movies that came past this. I'm surprised no one's really ever done it that way again, right?
Yeah.
Because you can find another scenario where you can completely do a similar type of thing and with a similar direction. But you think of something like Paranormal Activity, where it's really more about the house cameras, right? And just like, you can sit in a corner for 5 minutes in that movie and have the toilet paper move. And like, oh my God, what the fuck is that?
But you're right that and in that movie, the husband also isn't taking it seriously enough. So he's doing it as this hobby, but we never get his regret scene. We never get him realizing, oh, I shouldn't have ever toyed with this stuff. It's going to kill me.
Yep. There
is something very specific about that. And you're right. I mean, and there's been other great found footage movies. I'm thinking of the Spanish movie Wreck. That I absolutely love that film, but it's very different.
Poughkeepsie tapes.
Because I love Poughkeepsie tapes.
Oh yeah.
But those are very different in tone. They don't have. There is something so intimate, especially about this particular scene.
I'm even thinking of something, and this is definitely more high budge, but something like Chronicle, where it may not necessarily be found footage, but it's the movie is through the eyes of these kids and this camera, right?
Right.
And, even something loose like that isn't necessarily a horror movie. It's more of a superhero movie than anything.
Right.
That would have never been made if Blair Witch wasn't made.
Nope.
And I think it's a pioneering film that is super important, especially when it comes to the horror genre, I think, because it changed a lot of things there. And the idea of found footage on its own nature is pretty haunting just alone by itself, which is why horror movies attach themselves to that idea so much, because it is so effective in the horror genre.
And really in that late 90s era when this came out was sort of like that first period of time where an average kid could afford a device that could actually record what was happening in the moment. And for my money, you can keep all your super slick looking horror movie stuff. Like, when it is grainy
and your crappy in your music that's cueing everything
exactly
that should happen.
When there's none of that and you have some grainy footage where you're like, I don't know what I saw, right? Like, that is so much more effective.
And it's also Bruce, right? It's Bruce from Jaws. It's what you don't see.
What you don't
it's
see.
What's outside of the tent. When I remember specifically in the film where something comes up to their tent and just
yeah
and it's like actually moving the tent and you see it, and it's probably just a crew member fucking with them or something, but in the moment of the movie that seems so painfully real that you're trapped, you're claustrophobic, everything inside of that tent with them, and scared out of your mind because what the fuck is it? And then you wake up and then you see all the shit hanging from the trees and the piles of rocks and sticks and all that stuff. It's it's not how people, especially back in 1999, traditionally thought about a witch either.
Exactly. There's like one person had some anecdote of like, there was an old woman and she was naked, but she was covered in fur and she was standing a foot over the water. And I was like, what? That's not a witch. No, I don't like that at all. Which does make me think of, and I just forgot the name of the movie, Willow Creek.
Willow Creek.
It's Willow Creek. If you have not seen Willow Creek and you do like scary movies and you do appreciate when found footage can be done well, go watch this movie, because there is a scene.
He's a genius director too.
Oh my God, that is one of the scariest moments. But just again, it's great to kind of look at this movie that spearheaded, this whole scene.
I agree.
And still just like fantastic,
highly
bit
effective
of acting.
Yeah. No, and my favorite part is when she says, I'm scared to close my eyes, I'm scared to open them, and you're just like, holy shit.
Yeah, you're like, you're at your wit's end. I mean, it's like having a psychotic break almost. Like, you're like,
2 minutes, that's all we get. And just amazing little scene, and really iconic and important film history if you think about it from a generational standpoint.
Completely.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. That's that one scene from Blair Witch Project. Please like and subscribe.
Yes.
We got all sorts of things for you guys to follow. So hit that notification bell, subscribe on podcast, follow us on Instagram, all that stuff. We will see you next week. We're going to do a punishment review of Welcome to Marwin.
Oh, we'll see you guys then.
See ya.